Hey everybody, it's Party Elite here with another video discussing Total War Warhammer 2. This mini-series evolved out of a single video I was going to do, and in it, I speculate various factors about the DLC plans for the second Total War Warhammer game. While the first video was a shot in the dark, this one is significantly more grounded in reality. Mirroring the Call of the Beastmen DLC, the first faction we receive for Game 2 is most likely going to be the Tomb Kings. The DLC will probably have some fancy name like The Rise of the Tomb Kings or The Incantation of Awakening, but what can we expect from the Tomb Kings? Let's get the obvious out of the way with a bit of a history lesson. We can expect Settra the Imperishable, the King of Kings, High King of Nehekara, Lord of the Earth, Monarch of the Sky, Ruler of the Four Horizons, Mighty Lion of the Infinite Desert, Great Hawk of the Heavens, Majestic Emperor of the Shifting Sands, Eternal Sovereign of Khemri's legions as the faction leader, I would think. Settra was a terrible tyrant, but an effective one. In fact, calling him a tyrant seems incorrect. The Unifier of Nehekara, a ruler that was both feared and loved, and one that took the advice of his people and made sure the gods loved him as well. Early in life, he erected many monuments to the gods, restored temples, and even sacrificed his own children as a show of commitment as he prayed on the first anniversary of his coronation, beseeching them to restore Khemri to its former greatness and to give him power such that he might destroy his enemies. It was the response of the gods in the form of the first flooding of the Great Vitae River in decades, nourishing the land and washing away disease that solidified Settra's position as the first priest king of Khemri. Starting with the scarab city Numis and moving on to Xandrie, Settra grew in power, leading one of the largest Nehekaran armies of all time, an army that unified Nehekara. As Nehekara entered a golden age under Settra's dictatorship, he turned his eyes outside the borders, seeking greater conquests. As he tried to expand his lands as far as the eye could see, he eventually realized that no matter how strong his rule, no matter how large his army, or how far he spread, there would always be land out of his reach due to his biggest limitation: mortality. And thus, the cult of the dead, the mortuary cult, came to be, something that forever changed the face of Nehekara and in fact the world entirely. The mortuary cult worked hard to grant Settra immortality, but despite all their efforts, they were only able to extend Settra's life to a great extent, unable to avoid the inevitability of death. They believed, however, that the dead could be brought back to life, bound to imperishable bodies. It would take centuries for this to be perfected, if even possible. So Settra surrendered to mortality, but not before a grand pyramid was built to be his tomb, and the tomb of his loyal warriors, servants, and bodyguards to be buried alive alongside their king. It was thousands of years later, after the mortuary cult was able to perfect their technique through multiple generations, that the Tomb Kings rose. But first we must speak of Nagash and his Black Pyramid. Nagash was destined to serve in the mortuary cult as the first son of King Khatep of Khemri, while his younger brother Khatep ascended to the throne. Setting the tone for his rule to come, Nagash began to corrupt the mortuary cult and swayed the minds of some acolytes in order to serve him. Then, he opted for regicide as a means to sit upon the throne himself. His reign was cruel and merciless. Learning dark magic from imprisoned dark elves, he began to dabble in necromancy, mixing his new knowledge with that of the mortuary cult. It was from this blasphemy that the elixir of life was created. Next, he began the construction of his Black Pyramid. It was no tomb. Instead, it strengthened Nagash's magical prowess, towering over everything in Nehekara, even the Great Pyramid of Settra. As Khemri's resources wasted away into the construction of this pyramid, slaves and resources were taken as tribute or through force, and Nagash conquered in a brutal manner that focused around the completion of his pyramid. When the pyramid was complete, Nagash was made significantly more powerful by it, and the winds of magic themselves blew more powerfully over all of Nehekara than ever before. But Nehekara itself was a husk of its former self, withering away in poverty and destitute. This resulted in a civil war between Nagash and the priest kings that refused to serve under him, where Nagash raised the dead to do battle, while the mortuary cult used magic of their own to bring statues to life, with souls of great warriors of the past bound to them. A battle of epic proportions saw Nagash's forces defeated, Khemri besieged, and sacked. Nagash's lieutenants, were pulled from the safety of the Black Pyramid and executed in broad daylight. Nagash, however, managed to escape thanks to the sacrifice of Arkan. It was several centuries of weak rule that followed: famine, civil war, and foreign marauders alongside reduced authority among royalty made for harsh times until Al-Qadazar ascended to the throne of Khemri. While Al-Qadazar returned the prosperity of Nehekara, at least to a degree, and forbade the mortuary cult from experimentation, the lords of Lamia saw it fit to steal the Book of Nagash from the Black Pyramid. In the quest for power, they gave birth to the vampires, resulting from a perversion of the elixir of life. Of course, Al-Qadazar was quick to amass legions and destroy the vampires of Lamia, sending them scurrying away. Unfortunately, this worked to the benefit of Nagash, who saw these vampires as potential champions and began a new offensive against Nehekara with his undead legions, now with the dead risen from farther north. Though Al-Qadazar and his mortal forces won, ultimately and decisively defeating Nagash once more during the Battle of the Golden Skull, Nagash proceeded to poison the Great Vitae River, now known as the Great Mortis River. This resulted in yet another fall of Nehekara's greatness. As corpses piled up on the streets, Al-Qadazar had no men to lead to battle when Nagash and his undead legion marched upon Khemri, and Nagash once more sat upon the throne, throwing Al-Qadazar in a cell to rot. But this was not enough for Nagash. He returned to his stronghold, Nagashazar, and began a ritual that would raise the dead across the world and bind them to his will. His magic killed what mortals remained in Nehekara, though Al-Qadazar was spared so he might witness the fall of his great empire. While this great ritual was taking place, however, Al-Qadazar was freed from his prison cell, supposedly by Skaven, and was given a sword made of pure warpstone. In the midst of his incantation, Nagash was slain by Al-Qadazar, and his magic spun out of control. It was this magic that brought the dead to life across Nehekara, and while they all fell upon Nagash's death, the Tomb Kings were effective differently as a result of the magic wards and incantations protecting their burial grounds. These buried monarchs awoke and immediately began warring with each other for dominance over Nehekara. Settra remained asleep, protected even from Nagash's ill will by the superior wards on his pyramid. But as the risen kings fought each other, destroying what was left of Nehekara, the head of the mortuary cult, Grand Hierophant Khatep, began the incantation of awakening to bring Settra back in the hopes of restoring order. And order was restored. Settra destroyed those who would not bend the knee, turning their bones to powder and slaughtering their legions. Eventually, all the Tomb Kings bowed to Settra, and he became the undisputed ruler of all of Nehekara. After learning of what transpired to bring about the ruin of his once glorious Nehekara, Settra demanded that his vassal kings return to sleep while he remained vigilant, working to restore the nation to its former glory during the reign of millions of years. It is during this reign that we will be able to play as the Tomb Kings, and so Settra is the unquestionable leader of the faction. Settra is obviously very capable in melee, and tales speak of him slaying beasts as well as man. We might see him with an anti-large bonus to represent that, or he might just have a very high weapon damage, at which point does it really matter. I would have said the Crown of Nehekara is something he'd have by default, but seeing how the Wintertooth crown worked out for Throg, I think the Crown of Nehekara will be a quest item, potentially earned from a battle that replicates his war of vengeance against the Norskins, that strengthens nearby units and probably increases leadership as well. The Chariot of the Gods will likely be an unlockable mount option that will unlock magical and fire damage, and the Scarab Brooch of Osirian is potentially a quest item that gives him a great deal of damage resistance. He might come with this from the get-go instead, giving him that damage resistance from the start. Finally, the Blessed Blade of Tra will probably give him armor-piercing flaming attacks and probably increase the damage he deals as well. His quest will likely involve taking control of the Southlands or potentially killing all undead factions as a show of revenge against Nagash, sending him after the Vampire Coast as well. Though the Grand Hierophant Khatep was banished after Settra's resurrection for withholding information, I imagine we'll see him as a powerful caster lord. In fact, his exile makes him a more likely candidate. Remember, we're getting unique start positions, quests, etc. for all 4 lords. So with Khatep supposedly wandering the world looking for a cure to Nagash's curse, he might start quite far from home, maybe somewhere in Araby or in the Shifting Sands or the Great Desert, maybe even on a different continent. As the caster lord, he will have access to the lore of Nehekara and all the magic that entails. The Lich Staff will allow him to cast more effectively or more often, I think, while the Scroll of the Cursing Word might be a direct damage item that can only hurt casters or, more likely, reduce winds of magic flow around enemy casters for the battle. I think the third legendary lord we'll get is Prince Apophas, the cursed Scarab Lord. His story lacks any nobility. Regicide to become king of Numas resulted in his forced dethroning, let's call it, and he was entombed in a sarcophagus with flesh-eating scarabs. When the sarcophagus was reopened, the scarabs were missing, and all that was left was a skull picked clean. This skull was then inscribed with a glyph that cursed Apophas' soul for all eternity. People really didn't like him. He was, however, able to strike a deal with Osirian, god of the underworld. Apophas wanted to be released and would claim a soul for Osirian to replace his own, one that would be a perfect match. An impossible task, but it set Apophas free in some ways. Likely starting in Numas, I think Prince Apophas will be a duelist lord with the Strider trait, causing fear and terror with regeneration. His Soul Reaper will allow him to target enemy characters to reduce their melee stats in combat, I think, and he will probably also have his breath attack available to him. His campaign will likely end in a series of quest battles where he seeks a soul worthy of his replacement, and who knows, maybe he'll actually find one. It's also very possible that he'll start on a completely different continent, with his ultimate objective being to return to Numas and once more sit upon the throne. While this might make for a more interesting bit of variety, like Teclis on the Turtle Isle as we've seen, I don't think it'll be highly likely. Finally, I think we're getting High Queen Khalida. Potentially starting in Libaris, or maybe she will replace the Necroc Brotherhood, Khalida Neferher was killed partly by her own foolishness, but more directly by her cousin Neferata, the Queen of Lamia. When Neferata accused Khalida of treachery during a feast, Khalida stood to defend her honor, and in her haste and rage refused to elect a champion, opting to fight for herself in a duel. At this point in time, Neferata was already a vampire, having studied Nagash's texts and having drunk the elixir of life, and Neferata was afraid that Khalida knew. She needed to be silenced. At the end of the duel, Neferata bit her own tongue and kissed her cousin. As her vampiric blood transferred the curse into Khalida, the High Queen prayed for help from the goddess Asaf. Her prayers were answered as the vampiric corruption was cleansed from her body, but Khalida's life could not be preserved. Instead, she was taken back to Libaris, where she was embalmed and placed in a reliquary within the Temple of Asaf. It is through Khalida that Asaf enacts her will. Anytime her homeland is threatened, the High Queen awakens, bringing with her her legions, including famed archer legions that we'll likely see represented in the game. With poison attacks and high speed, she might give archers within a range of her fast reload times more damage output or poison damage. She'll likely have a quest chain for her venom staff, and once in her possession, I imagine it's a magic missile that causes poison damage as well as magical damage, of course. Yes, that's right, I'm taking a gamble and saying we won't get Arkan the Black as a legendary lord. Maybe later in the Super Ultra Mega campaign when Game 3 is out, will we see the likes of Nagash, Arkan, and Neferata is my guess. Generic lords will likely include a Tomb King and a Lich High Priest, while other available heroes and agents on the campaign map might include Tomb Princes, Lich Priests, Tomb Heralds, and Necrotects. I also want to hazard a guess and say we'll see the Ushabti as individuals on the field with capabilities in melee and in range. Alternatively, we'll see them as a unit that I'll discuss later. With the Tomb Kings, we're also likely to get the Lore of Nehekara for casters alongside the Lore of Light and the Lore of Death. The lore attribute, the Restless Dead, looks to recuperate losses to any unit under the influence of your augment spells. This will likely be a simple hit point regeneration, bringing the dead back when the unit's living troops are healed to a maximum. Xar's Incantation of the Desert Wind will likely make an appearance as a spell that increases speed, charge speed, and potentially increases vigor temporarily as well. Jeff's Incantation of Cursed Blades probably increases melee damage and melee attack, possibly even imbuing magical damage to melee, while Neru's Incantation of Protection will likely provide defensive buffs in the form of damage resistance or simply a higher melee defense and increased armor. Tra's Incantation of Righteous Smiting will likely increase melee attack by a significant amount and possibly give a boost to weapon damage as well. Osirian's Incantation of Vengeance might just slow an enemy unit down, like Gork'll Fix-It, maybe also cause some vigor loss, or it might reduce stats as if the enemy unit were traversing through difficult terrain. Usep's Incantation of Desiccation will likely reduce weapon strength, melee defense, or armor for a short while, weakening the enemy unit to your forces. Sahmet's Incantation of the Skullstorm will probably be a very dusty orange vortex spell which I'm sure will look gorgeous, but be utterly useless if it decides to float around rather than stay put like the Pit of Shades. The army itself will probably be pretty straightforward until we reach some of the more interesting units. Skeleton warriors with swords and shields, and skeleton warriors with spears are likely going to be core, albeit weak melee units. We might see a great weapon variant, but I think that to be unlikely. Skeleton archers and skeleton horse archers will most certainly make an appearance, and we might even get poison variants available for recruitment or selection in multiplayer. The horse archers will likely have vanguard deployment, and both units might be able to fire while moving. I imagine we'll see the Parthian shot with the horse archers too. The skeleton horsemen themselves might come as light cavalry with vanguard deployment along with a speared anti-large variant, and they might also have a lance variant, making them more potent against infantry on the charge. We're most certainly going to see skeleton chariots as well. It would be quite silly to see a Tomb King army without these available to them. They will be just like standard chariots, maybe with more punching power than most, and perhaps a bit more on the expensive side. Those will be the backbone of the typical Tomb King army, but of course, there's more to the Tomb Kings than a pile of bones and chariots. Tomb Guard with sword and shield, Tomb Guard with great weapons, and Tomb Guard with halberds are my predictions for Tomb Guard unit variants. You've got lightly armored anti-infantry, heavily armored armor-piercing anti-infantry, and lightly armored armor-piercing anti-large. Probably a more common sight on the battlefield as non-fodder units. Necropolis Knights will likely make an appearance in anti-infantry and anti-large forms, and I suspect they'll have a fairly high charge bonus as well, though with low melee defense stats as heavy cavalry. The Ushabti will potentially be a type of monstrous infantry for the Tomb Kings, coming with great weapons and ranged variants. I think by default they'll be well armored, and the great weapon variant will likely have bonus against large enemy units, while the ranged variant will possibly do armor-piercing damage at the cost of ammunition. I think Scarab Swarms and Carrions will fill the roles of Fellbats and Direwolves, not armor-piercing, not heavy-hitting, mainly there for distraction, baiting, and shutting down enemy movement and range support. It is possible, however, that these guys are completely removed from the game, though I do find it unlikely that we'll lose both. I think we're very likely to see the Kemrian War Sphinx. They're pretty iconic in my opinion, so I'll be surprised if they aren't included. They might come with two variants, a base version that causes a great deal of damage, fear, and terror, similar to a Dragon Ogre Shaggoth, or they might come with Howdah and Javelin Throwers or Spearmen on their backs for anti-large benefits. Either way, I imagine they'll be individuals rather than coming in as a group within a unit. It's also possible that they'll cause poison damage in either variant, and just like the Hydra can breathe fire for the Dark Elves, I imagine the War Sphinx will have a breath attack of its own. The Necrosphinx is a beast I would hope makes it into the game, though I fear there's a slight chance it might be cut. An anti-large monster killer, I think it'll be pretty expensive, well armored, and have a high melee defense as well. Unless surrounded by anti-large units, I suspect a Necrosphinx will do a lot of work and help screen enemy cavalry before coming in for flanking support. The Necrolith Colossus is another must-have in my mind. These bone giants will likely be very expensive, have anti-infantry sweeping strikes, do a great deal of damage, and cause fear and terror. We might see variants for dual-wielding weapons, great weapons, and maybe even a ranged variant to act as artillery, but either way, I certainly suspect they'll be making an appearance. On the topic of artillery, I think Screaming Skull catapults will be there, if only to give the Tomb Kings a decent artillery option. I do think we'll miss out on Hyro Titans and Sepulchral Stalkers, and that's especially too bad on the part of the latter because I'd love to see them in action as armor-piercing anti-large units with relatively high speeds and possibly the Strider trait and maybe causing terror. I also think the Tomb Scorpion might be cut from the game, and as much as I'd like a unit of Scorpions running around, I'd rather have War Sphinxes and Necrosphinxes. The Tomb Kings are all but an announced addition to the game. I suspected they'd be in Game 2 since the map of the first game was revealed, and now that we've seen the map of Game 2, it's just a matter of time. What do you think we're likely to see with the Tomb Kings? Any other lords? Unit variants I've missed perhaps? Let me know in the comments below, and if you've enjoyed this video, feel free to drop a like and let me know. As always, thank you very much for watching, and if you'd like more Total War content, make sure you subscribe to this channel for an endless flow of battles, let's plays, news, and constant speculation.